Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's very special event. This is our project recipe. I love these events each month because they give us a chance to really get down to the how. So many times we talk about 10,000 things we might do with our projects, but it's with project recipes that we get into a real project, something that somebody actually did, how they went about it, lessons learned, tips and tricks that are very tactical and practical. So, with today's event, I'm delighted to have a very special guest with us, Bridget Badoe McQuick, who joins us also as Lady Essie on Substack, and you'll find that in the show notes as I share that with you. Bridget is a performance artist and storyteller in North London and came to my attention from an introduction from Emma Cox, who many of you will know for her Journeys into Genealogy podcast. Bridget has a wonderful episode with Emma. And in that, she was talking about the kinds of things that she's done with storytelling and encouraging people to tell their stories, how important those stories are. I was smitten because so many of us really struggle to get those stories told. And sometimes we have to extract the stories from the people who know the past, who know the stories, who have the background, who have the leads to get us there. And so often we look at this in the formalities of oral histories and whatnot. But what we really comes down to is getting to the part of telling the stories and bringing it out. And Bridget has such a delightful way to make that happen in telling the stories. It is with all of these events, a little bit of housekeeping. We will capture the questions. You're very welcome to chat amongst yourselves in the chat here during our session. Please take a moment to note a big Q when you have a specific question that you want Bridget to answer. I've told her not even to worry about the questions in the chat during the presentation so she won't be distracted. If there's some basic point of clarification, I'll jump in and interrupt her. In the meanwhile, we'll have some time for questions toward the end, so feel free to queue them up yourself. And without further ado, let me turn to Bridget and have you take it away. Again, it's just a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. Been excited to do this since we had our conversation. So yes, encouraging the reluctant storyteller. So it's a recipe on how to get the most reluctant person, give them confidence to share their stories that matter. There's always ways to get someone to draw it out. I'm going to start off with a quote. Stories are a communal currency of humanity. I really love that quote because it really talks about how stories are our oldest form of communication. They're like the gifts that we have, that we give to each other to exchange ideas. It's how we think. They enrich our lives. They connect us. They shape how we see the world. And, we are storytellers. Think about those everyday conversations that we have, the news stories that we hear. Social media now, all those posts that people be sharing, the texts, the documentaries, films, magazines, even at work. How was your weekend? You proceed to tell the story of how your weekend was in your groups, in your families, in your co-workers. So stories are like footprints, they're the footprints that we're leaving behind as we go, just collecting the human experience, each lesson, each memory, and everything else. So that's why it's important for us to get stories. So think about all the ways you can get stories. Think about every conversation as a way into getting a story. So why do we need stories? Because it allows us to connect and have empathy. There are people, I work in a place where they love data, but you need the stories behind the data to connect. There's lots of studies that shows that you get more people to act when you give them stories. So it gives us connection and empathy. And also we love stories for entertainment escape. We all have Netflix, obviously, Netflix and, going to cinemas and everything else. So we like to just get taken away with things. And then we like to explore and imagine. It allows us to go into a whole new world. And, identity and self-reflection, that's where our family stories are really important, helps us build on our identity, preserving culture and history. Also about social commentary, the things that help us to bring change. and we all have universal themes: loss, betrayal, friendships, anything else. So, I will share with you now my sort of storytelling journey. So I grew up on stories. So my parents are from Ghana in West Africa. They're from the Akan people. And they grew up hearing Anansi stories. So when they were younger, what they said was after they had their evening meal, everyone would sit around in a circle and they would hear Anansi stories. So Anansi stories are from the Kan people, and they're folk tales, and it's based on a spider, and he's a trickster, and he goes and shows the wisdom, the knowledge, and kind of moral stories. And so they would sit around, and everybody had to tell a story. And if you told it well, they would sing a celebratory song. If you didn't tell it so well, you would get a song going, hey, you need to do better next time. So they had so there was song, there was stories and everything else. So they would tell us these Nazi stories. And my dad would then call this thing story time, where he would make us tell stories. So he'll go, once upon a time, your turn, tell a story. And we all had to go around telling stories. So that's where storytelling has always been around. And when they came from Ghana as well, they kind of built these communities. I like to say there's a saying that says, it takes a village to raise a child. And I would say I'm a product of the village. My family had people. There was always people around. So there was all these community stories, these people talking. And I kind of realized there was three sets of people. You had the open books, those that would just, nothing would stop them speaking, and they would just have so many stories and so willing. And then you had the in between, the half open. So they would tell stories depending on how they felt. Then you had the closed books. These are the people that only give you what you need to know as when they want to do it, and you have to draw a bit more out of them. So, those are the kind of different types of people you had. And I was just curious and such an avid listener that I would just sit there listening, make sure they didn't hear me, because, you're young, you're not meant to be, heard. So I would sit there just diligently listening to these wonderful stories and experiences of everybody having. And also, I loved reading. I was an avid reader, so I would get lost in a book. I still love a library, one of my favorite places. So that's how storytelling has always been part of my life. And so as I've grown, I've just built this foundation and just kind of embraced storytelling through the different formats. So as a writer, as a poet, writing stories, poetry was my thing that I always used to love reading. Maya Angelou was my first author that I've read an autobiography, and I was like, wow, someone's personal story. And since then, it's like she introduced me into the memoir and bio kind of world. So I love them as well. Performing arts, a dancer. So I've always danced. For me, dance is also storytelling. We tell stories through our body language, through movement. And carnival. So I got into carnival arts. So we have a carnival every year in the UK, and not in Notting Hill, London. So yes, I've been in carnival. And when you wear costumes as a masquerader, you get into costume and you tell the story of the costume that you're wearing. So you can imagine I tell stories in every type of way. And I sort of do interviewing as well as community radio presenter, podcasting. I facilitate conversations at work. Like even work, I try and collect those work stories as well. And photos, I love taking photos because photos also tell stories. And I got into oral history through, there's a beautiful museum. If ever you get to London, there's a museum called Bruce Castle Museum. It's in Tottenham, area I live in. And they had a project called Be a Heritage Champion. So this is where they got local residents to champion the local heritage of our area. And it was, and we got taught oral history, and I was like, wow, there's a whole process to this. So then I got to collect the stories of everyone that lived in the area and local history projects. So I still get to get involved in it. So that's how I've been involved in storytelling in different ways and come around different people. And so now I'm connecting the dots, and then I met Emma, because I was trying to do a project actually for my local church and do a oral history project. So I was all searching for people to help me do this project. So I came across Emma and we got talking, and then I got on her podcast. Then she introduced me to Barbara, and I found Project King. I was like, oh my goodness, wow, this is a lovely place of family history. So I'm now moving more into this area. And from speaking to Emma and Barbara, seeing all the work they did, they kind of helped me kind of figure out where I want to be. And next year, I'm going to be doing my MA in creative practice and doing a whole storytelling project. So I'm excited, So yes, I'll be collecting the stories, especially of the untold stories. I really believe we have to challenge the single story narrative of certain communities where they like to say, this is what this is, but everyone's lived experience will help uncover those stories that are untold. And particularly people from Africa and the Caribbean and across the African diaspora, they're the stories that I really want to celebrate, bring to light, and especially the migration and movement story. I was telling Barbara earlier on, I thought this was an hour earlier, so I was in like Uber trying to get home on time, and I had a whole 20 minutes of this Uber driver telling me about his story of how he came to England from Zimbabwe, and he shared for like, it was amazing. I was telling him I was coming to do a talk about storytelling and family history, and he gave a whole story about his journey to England and how he wanted to, yes, it was amazing. So just getting that, just in an Uber, just literally getting someone to share their story. So that's how easy it is to get the conversations going. Reluctant storytelling. I know what it's like because I was one of those reluctant storytellers. But you think you're a writer. How can you be a reluctant storyteller? Because I was writing because I've always been curious about people. I always ask questions. Like I was always there. Why? What? Where? They kind of called me nosy, but it's curiosity. And then, I got involved in 2012. We had the London Olympics. The country was buzzing. We had all these amazing projects, and I got involved in a writing project where I got to have my first poems published. I was so excited. I'm a published poet. Yay, 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 yay. And then the facilitator said to me, I love how you write, but you keep sharing stories of other people, but I know nothing about you. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I don't know anything about you. I just, you share stories of other people, which is true. I was sharing stories about other people, but I wasn't sharing stories about myself. So she said to me, let go of the fear and open up, because people need to know who you really are. And that's what began my journey, because I was writing those personal stories. I was writing the poems, but they were just for me. They were in my journal, in my diary, and everything else. They weren't being shared. So I had to lean into my own vulnerability and face my fears to start sharing my story. So I kind of know why people don't want to share stories, because I've been that person where I will only share the surface stuff. So yeah, so I understand firsthand how it's like to be reluctant, and you have to really work to develop these stories. So now I know how to be a bit more thoughtful to others and better support them on their journey to be reluctant. And what I've kind of started to realize is people are reluctant for a lot of reasons, that can block them. Sometimes it's life events that are so painful and they haven't actually processed it yet. Because sometimes you need to be able to process what's happened to be able to talk about it. And if you haven't processed it, it's too painful to talk about it. Those that talk about painful experiences have spoken about it so many times now that they've spoken about it from different ways. So they now are able to share it in a different way. So sometimes it just might be they haven't processed it. And other times, feelings of humiliation or shame gets triggered. People like feelings of judgment or being labeled weird or crazy. And sometimes it's even, if I tell my part of the story, it's going to bring up the other person, because obviously when you're telling your family, your story, you're going to bring up family stuff. And maybe you don't want to talk about stuff at home because it's belongs to somebody else. So it's all of those things. And you're like, I'm this type of person. If I share what I did in the past, someone's going to judge me. Some people are afraid of being rejected or ridiculed, losing control, or even appearing vulnerable. Some people haven't got used to being vulnerable yet. And some people just feel they're not worthy of sharing that, and all those beautiful moments that they have, they're just going to keep it to themselves. Or, some things are so personal and so big that they don't see the beauty in it. And, so they don't know how to articulate it. And sometimes it's just cultural expectations, because I come from a culture where what happens at home stays at home. You don't share your home business outside. So for some people to go and share stories is going against what you're used to doing. So, that's basically, so there's lots of things, but fear kind of underpins a lot of things. But there's 3 issues that really do boil down when I have asked people to share their stories. And one of the main ones I always hear first is, my life is boring. I haven't lived an exciting life. I have little to say. I've just lived an ordinary life. Or my life has been challenging. I don't think you'll understand. I don't think I want to talk about it. And then the other one is, which we all have, is I have no time. When have I got time to talk about my life? So those are 3 of the things that people really come up with about why they can't share the story. But really the approach is really just to encourage them to tell them the story, help them to get started and keep them going, and create a way to really capture the story. So one of the things I came up with was create an invitation to share. I kind of call it sowing seeds. You just sow them seeds, because you may not be the story collector, but you'll make them the storyteller. So really it's about really showing interest. And how I came about this was I used to go Ghana a lot, and it was 2003, and I had met another number of family members. So my mom's family was just growing. I'm like, who are these people? Oh my goodness, how am I going to keep track of all these people? So I kind of got a book, started writing down all these names, but no one would really tell me anything. I even went and looked at all the genealogy stuff where you get all the sheets and have all the questions. I went and handed it to them and say, can you fill this out? Nothing. The traditional approaches did not work. I wasn't getting anything from anyone. But there's an area in Ghana called Cape Coast where my family's from. And in this area, we have family homes, more than one. And I have to go to each family home. So I'm like, okay, whose house is this? When was it made? Who lived here? I would get everything. So if it's about place, if it was about people of the past, people were willing to share. So I got, people in place. So I then started to invite. So every time I went to Ghana, I would get more. So every invitation. So every time I went, because I knew I was interested, I would get more. So that's how I kind of came up with the idea of an invitation to share. So even if you only get a couple of bits, it's a part of the puzzle. So just it's like you're building a puzzle together. So that's how I saw the invitation to share, like a puzzle. So that's how I came across that, just literally doing it as an invitation to share. But you just keep showing them that you're interested. And some people want to be invited to share. No one's asked them. No one's ever asked them. No one's really said, I would love to hear more. Oh, tell me about your life. Are you willing to share? So some people, until they're asked, they don't know. So yeah, just keep showing, just keep throwing out those seeds, throwing out those invitations, keep them open, and look for the stories in the everyday conversations that can lead to further exploration. As I said today, the Uber driver, I'm now going to go and research Zimbabwe now. I'm just going to go out there and do that. So just keep doing that. And another way I found that out was one of my aunts. I went to her sometimes the invitation comes as a form of advice. So sometimes you just go for advice. I went to her for advice, not to get to her story. So she literally just life advice. Auntie, how do you do this? Or why did you choose your career? And from that invitation, from that asking for advice. So I know someone's mentioned earlier on the call about trying to get someone else to share about a place they found. It might be the approach is you go for advice. If I know somebody that has something like this, what would you advise them to do to make it get to this stage? So everyone wants to be advised because, as I like to say, we are all experts by experience. So go for their expertise. So sometimes invitation is going by their expertise. Can you share with me how you did this? Or can you share with me what you did? And once they shared that expertise or that advice, then you'll be like, hey, that was really interesting. I love what you said about that. Would you be willing to share more? Doesn't have to be right now, in your own time. And then you keep it moving and go talk about something else. A few months later, you might bring up again. And you just keep sowing seeds until they get used to the idea. So that's really how I kind of called it open invitations. And then you just prepare with conversations, rapport, and research. So it depends on what kind of storytelling you're anticipating or what you want. And even when you do prepare for oral history interviews, and even if you have a good relationship with a person, you still may need to do a lot more conversations. Like I'm trying to do my dad at the moment, do his story. He's got so many stories. I'm having to have lots of conversations just to get him ready to that point. So it's the conversations to find out what would work, what he prefer, what support he needs. And it just varies depending on the relationship. So if you're very close to the person, you may not have to have as many conversations. If you're not as close, you may have to build up that rapport and trust. You need to show that genuine interest that you really want to do. And also what I like to do is do a historical research on what's happening around the time they were born or when they were at a particular age and everything else. So what popular music or film or events or world events, where were you when this happened? What were you doing? And everyone's got obviously a story to share about what they were doing. So, give timeless references to different people. So that's one of the ways that I like to share. And, the greats, like the great books, William Shakespeare or, William Wordsworth. So when I was working with some of the older people in a assisted living facility, I used to do poetry workshops with them. And whenever I did poetry, I'd always look for the classics like William Wordsworth, because then they would talk about how they learned about him in school. And then once we spoke about him, and then we'd go with different people. So yeah, always try and one of the things is going to be patience is going to be your best friends. Patience, you're gonna have to lean into patience, because once you're patient with the person, you know you're going to get it. You just have to decide. And maybe you may not be the person that gets it, maybe someone else might be, but you give them the invitation to come and tell us. So it's always about giving them the confidence to become a teller of their story. So even if you don't get it, someone else will, or they might write it themselves. They might go out and write it themselves. And one of the first and foremost requirements is really to create a safe space. So psychological safety is one of the most important things in people wanting to share. If they don't feel safe enough, they will not share their story. So safe in terms of feeling that you're a safe person to share as well. They have to feel safe enough with you, that there's enough trust and rapport built out with you. And the environment is, safe enough, because hearing someone's story is like, it's sacred. They're letting you carry a part of them as well, keeping their story. So they need to know they can trust you to open up. And you have to kind of create a supportive environment as well, just to make sure it's structured, it's emphasized, it's confidentiality, respect, active listening. So it's all about creating that safe environment, providing choice and control. As I said, some people are going to be like, that's difficult, don't want to talk about that. So obviously giving them the option, like, you don't talk about anything you don't want to talk about, and giving them the option that they might want, because sometimes as story collectors, we have a preference of how we like to collect stories, but which may not be the same as the person that you're trying to collect the stories with. So somebody else might like you to write, someone else might want to do it as art, someone else might want to dance. So it might be how they want to share their story. You may have to work with them. So for example, with my dad, we're exploring ideas of him doing a podcast. So doing stories by Uncle Coffee. So that's literally what we called it. He's really up for the idea. It was either that idea, or he was going to do it as Desert Island Discs. So he was going to do it as a Desert Island disc type of thing. So where he chooses five songs, books, and everything else. I don't know if you've heard Desert Island Disc. So we were going to do it that approach. So so I've been exploring different ways of trying to get him to share his stories. So Desert Island is really good. Yeah, you interview someone. It's an interview style of where you get them to share some songs, a book, an item that they'll take with them if they were stranded on desert island. So basically, yeah, that's the format. So you kind of get them to, but the songs really talk about their life. So the songs are important and reflect what their life is. So that's another really interesting way to get people to share the stories. If there's somebody who likes cooking, you might decide to do a event where you get people around a kitchen table and talk about food that's important to them. So then you might do it as so think about what it is that they have, their hobby, and try and connect it in. Like some people like sports, so you might lean into sports. So you might try and talk about make it into a sports program. So just be creative in how you get it, that makes it easy for them to and normalize vulnerability, because a lot of people don't realize everybody's vulnerable. Everyone might be a bit shy of it, and so just really let them know that being vulnerable is normal, and you may have to lead by example. So be prepared to be vulnerable and share a personal story as well. Show that you're willing to be vulnerable, and that shows it's a strength, and empower them to do the same. So so have your stories ready to share so that you get back, just be aware to do that. And so for me, the focus I do is a lot of my stuff is really in community gatherings. So that's really where I get a lot of my stories, because in the community stories, the hidden personal family stories will start to emerge, and that's where you can collect more. And how I kind of came up with this was when I got invited to do a Black History Month poetry event at an assisted living facility. So there was 2 assisted living facilities in my local area, and I went to do that. And the power of the poetry and the residents like engaging. So I was called back to do it. So literally it was once a month. I ended up calling it a creative expression workshop called Play with Words. So we just played with words. And we would go in, I would get poems, I said Wordsworth or Shakespeare. I would even get songs of particular periods. And then they would start sharing. So one of the things I would hear from them was like, I have nothing interesting to say. I've got no good stories. And in these sessions, there were residents that had, some had dementia, had stroke impairment, or they had mild learning difficulties, mental health conditions, chronic pain, isolation, or varying literacy levels. But one thing they did do, they all engaged through the poetry. So something about poetry and its way of like being short and its meaning, and you can take whatever meaning from words and it's personal to you. There's no right or wrong in how you interpret. Was really where, and then I would use nature, I would use food. So I would use different themes as to help them. And there was one older gentleman who said he had no interesting life story. This man had lived like 20 different lives. He had been an air raid mechanic in World War II. He had been an extra, met Marlon Brando. He had been a judo champion. His stories were amazing, and he was so excited. He actually went and bought a little notebook and started to write his memoirs. He was not going to share his stories. And when I started these workshops, he was like, "Oh my gosh!" Every month I see him, I'm like, "What have you written this month? What have you written this month?" He had a life of adventure. So, because he didn't think he had anyone to share it with, because he didn't have any more family left over. So he didn't think anyone wanted to know. And I was like, no, people want to know. Please share. And he did. And there was another lady I remember talking about when she came as a nurse and she was working, and she a black nurse. A lot of black nurses, when they first started working, would get told, I don't want you to touch me, due to racism and everything else. And her response was, I'm not going to touch you, but I'm going to care for you. And she cared for this gentleman so much that she had he left money in his will for her. So those stories, so stories like that. Another story of another resident about when she was in Jamaica and swimming with her sister, and how a tide, I think it was a wave, nearly took her sister, and she had to go swimming to go and save her sister, climbing trees. So all these amazing stories came out of so really and truly, once you get them in a community setting, once someone starts, everybody else kind of starts to share their stories. So you really do have to. And then my favorite museum, Bruce Carter Museum, created these storytelling chairs. And I was like, I want one. So I went and created my own storytelling chair as well. And I made it into bright colored cloth. And then last year I took it to a church event. So we have in UK on the 22nd of June, Windrush Day, which celebrates those from the Caribbean that came to the UK to help restore the UK after the war. And so I brought this chair, and they sat down on the chair, and everyone came and shared their stories about how they first came. And as soon as one person sat on the chair, everyone else came. It literally was it's like a domino effect. And so things like having a chair, having a prompt, nature, food, like traditional. So I used to ask the question like, what was your traditions at Christmas or Easter? People always share. And another time in the older people's facilities, we talked about love, what love is. And we created a love poem. Love is, so literally everybody gave me their words and I put it into a poem called Love Is. So they have this poem that they made together. So we created a collaborative piece. So yeah, really just be very creative in how you get people to share. Like sometimes you may have, even in your family, you may want to try that story time I've talked about earlier on. So you might want to get everyone in a group over food and drink. Food is always good. People love talking over food. Bit of food, bit of music, get everyone in a comfortable place and start the storytelling. So you may actually get really great stories even in a family environment. So try the group approach if you're finding you're not getting anywhere. So find a story hook. And sometimes some people, the reason they can't share is because they're just not organized. They've got so much, they just don't know what to do. They're feeling a bit overwhelmed. So I, on my own journey, realized I had to do that as well. So I had a fear of public speaking back in the day. I was a nervous wreck. And then I had to do the journey. I joined Toastmasters and having to start writing speeches about my life. I had to create a story library. So I knew what stories to share, because I'm still half an open book. I don't share everything. So yeah, I had to kind of create. So I came up with the idea of creating a story library. So I kind of went through things I wanted to share and had them on tap. So whenever I need to share anything, I know. So, and I have them in topics. So my childhood, family, travel and migration, career, religion, relationships, children, significant life events, hobbies and interests, people that have influenced me, events and universal themes. So I kind of put them into those themes and then kind of knew what stories I'd be willing to share. And so I thought, if that worked for me, it's going to work for other people. So that's what I did. So you really help people build their story landscape of those type of topics, because everybody will talk about one of those 11 items. Some people may not talk about their childhood because it might be too traumatic or difficult, but everybody will talk about traveling or migration. Everyone will talk about food. Everyone will talk about their career, and their relationships, or who's influenced them, or who had an impact on them, or even their hobbies. Hobbies are always really great. So yeah, so if you help people create their story library, then you will get more out of it. So it's just a way of organizing stories into a way that's easy to get. So that's how you kind of find the stories. And sometimes you need to offer them a starting point. As I said before, for me, the poetry was always a starting point for a lot of people. And sometimes you need to appeal to the senses. So sometimes even smells, get a nice smelling candle that might bring someone back, or cook something, or some nice smelling food that might bring some memories, or images, sounds. Yeah, I've seen Two Truths and a Lie. Yes, that's a great book. A book, some songs, getting some clothing. So for example, my grandmother, when she passed away, I inherited as her eldest granddaughter a piece of her cloth. So this cloth is like, I look at it and try and imagine the stories that come from that piece of clothing. So things like that. So they will have, clothing has a lot of memories as well. So just offer a starting point, as I said, through just to help unblock the memory or the story, and really use their passions, really lean into their passions. So for example, I've got one of my in-laws, he loves football. And so we were talking about football and soccer for years of those that don't know. But yeah, so he talked about how his grandfather was a scout. I've planted the invitation to him is, why don't we do a little stories about football and football in the stories, and get all the guys in the family to talk about what football means to them. And we're going to try and create something around football in a sense, or gathering them in a nice little group talking about football, and get those stories out through that way. So yes, so offering a starting point is one of my ways. And then that helps bring the memories of life. And then you've got to collect the stories. And sometimes you will arrange the appointment, arrange the time to do the interviews, and then life can get in the way. And it just keeps, you can't get it together. Sometimes, like with my dad, for example, with his health, sometimes you haven't been able to do it. Sometimes health gets in the way, or just time. I would say find creative ways to record something. So for me, my grandmother, I remember one visit to Ghana. I've been trying to get something from her. So all I did was ask her, Grandma, what would you say was the greatest life advice you'd give me? And she goes, love everyone. And from that one conversation, I was able to record like about 20 minutes of her, how she met my granddad. I cherished that time, because if I hadn't done that, I would not have been able to get anything from her. So didn't get all her life. I managed to get a glimpse into her life by just at that moment. And one of my aunts as well, Aunt Julie, she again, I went to her for advice, and we hadn't planned to really collect her story, but I went for advice, and then we started collecting the stories. And she was a teacher, so I'd only known her as a teacher. And as we were talking, she was I had my notebook. I said, Auntie, as you're talking, I'm just going to take some notes. Nothing, just notes. Note down the advice you'll give me about life and relationships. I found out she had been a whole dressmaker. She had come to the UK in the 70s, seen the fashion houses, went back to Ghana, the centre of her craft. She had her own Julie's fashion house up in lights. It became the place for everyone to go. She was making clothing. Like, her children didn't know this whole life, in a sense. So I captured all this thing about her life as a fashion designer. And then when she left that behind due to a coup in Ghana, then she came to England and continued her life as a teacher. So she had a whole, and so that was not even a plan. That was literally creative and that was even recorded. I was literally just writing it by hand, just literally got my notebook, writ everything. And then I now make it into a really nice creative piece. So she told me everything about her childhood up until the point of her coming to England. So you just never know when, just always be prepared. You just never know when those stories might just flow with someone. So just always be prepared. And the next really thing is questions. I know they always say ask open questions, but it all is in the questioning. And you kind of have to kind of study the person, because some people you don't need to do too much questioning. You can ask one question and you will get everything. Like, they will just, like an open book, they will just give you everything. And other people, you're going to have to kind of listen to what they're saying and just kind of claw it in, but really ask the open questions and say, will this question open a door and invite them into the conversation, or will it close the door? Because even though it's an open question, it may not be a question they want to answer. So really think about the question and, ask, walk. So it's kind of walking with them, like you're holding their hands as you're asking the question. So really think about it and listen to the stories. And sometimes you need to let them lead, because sometimes with an interview, you can interrupt and you've lost a whole trail of thought because you wanted to ask a question. Sometimes it might be better to write the question down and then go, oh, I really loved when you said this about this. Do you want to tell me more? So sometimes you ask for more later rather than at the time. So I know sometimes you just want to ask those questions. Sometimes let them just listen, let them lead, and then think about the type of questions. So sometimes I've gone in when I've had a whole list of questions I was going to ask. And from the first thing they said, none of those questions are relevant. So I've had to kind of wipe those questions away and start rethinking the questions that are related to it. So it's really a question of really get to know where you are, because some people will really ask questions. And so, yeah, just always ask for more questions. And, because the person's first answer isn't the whole story. Sometimes that's just the surface, the surface. You want to be like an iceberg, go down, right down the bottom, into the sea. So sometimes just a simple, tell me more, really. And you will get more questions. Sometimes you can even turn off the recorder and then the best bit comes and you're like, oh no, record it back on, so sometimes you just be prepared you just never know when the questions are. And really the final thing I'll say is listening. There's a really nice Argentine proverb that I found that says, who speaks sows, who listens reaps. So, listening is really going to be the thing that's really going to open up and let people tell their stories. So, because active listening is a gift that we give other people. A lot of people don't get that gift of attention. So when they have someone that's just so interested in what they got to say, you'll be surprised at how much they'll pour out. And that's how I found out from when I did the assisted living facilities. There were people that never contributed, like they didn't really speak, but they loved coming every month because they got to listen and they had attention. So they might say a few things, but it was just that act of being able to listen. And some people love being able to. So yeah, so really engage with people by hearing what they've got to say. And sometimes we paraphrasing the key points, clarifying questions if you need to. But one thing we have to do is practice the skill of not interrupting. Silence, embrace the silence. I know sometimes we don't like silence, but silence is sometimes our powerful friend. Just embrace the silence, just let it be quiet, because sometimes I might be thinking, and if you say something, you've ruined that moment train of thought. So sometimes embrace silence. And there's something really powerful and freeing when someone hears your story. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever had this moment where you've met a stranger and you've just had an amazing conversation, just the two of you just spoken, literally, you've both been heard and listened to, and you come away feeling so nice because someone actually listened to you. So yeah, so just think about how to be that listener, be a true listener that, wants to really hear what the person's got to say. So really, I'm going to really end up with saying, through the art of storytelling, we can preserve our culture, educate future generations, and inspire change. So the power of personal stories is well documented. And we all have stories to tell. We are all experts by experience. And, we just want to share our stories. We want to tell our stories. And really, my goal is to sow seeds to ensure that even if I ain't collecting all the stories, I'm making people into storytellers. So yeah, that's it.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bridget. No pressure team here to ask the right questions. Ask the questions, but we have such a wonderful, wonderful, inspiring moment here. You jumped on with your video. Come on in. Join the party.
I found as you can see from some of my comments, I found it really interesting that a lot of the things you were talking about, Bridget, is the way I've always worked as a youth worker.
Okay.
Whether I worked in the UK or in Sweden as a youth worker, because I worked in both countries. It is this thing that as a youth worker, you need to share of your own stories. You need to have the courage to say, I can't do that. I don't know that. But maybe I can find someone who does. Which is a really, really hard thing for lots of people to to admit to that they don't know something.
Yes, yes.
And it's about listening. As you
Definitely.
talked about, the active listening, and to let other people talk, and to let them, to be flexible. So as you said, that you have to listen, and then you might have to change your questioning, or take away questions, and not just depending on where it goes. They take the lead and you just follow.
Yeah.
And that's how you work as a youth worker, or with any people for that matter, not only youth worker, but you know, it's what you're taught how to approach, and I find it really amazing, the similarities. And
Yeah.
we used to do that on camps and stuff like that. We used to sit in circles, and someone starts telling a story, and then you send it on to the next person, and you share, you build up a story. That was something that we did very, very often, and sometimes it could be just fiction, but sometimes it could be sort of telling about stories. And that's why I said 2 truths and a lie, because the idea with that one is that you tell 3 things that hopefully you're trying to tell things that the others don't know about you, and they have to guess what is the lie. And I was quite good at tricking people. That's how I learned that things that were sort of normal for me was extremely adventurous for most British people. So 2 countries that close to each other, and you have such different backgrounds on what is the norm.
It's interesting that you describe it that way, Anna, because that brings up a question that I was thinking about as Bridget was speaking, which is the idea, on one hand, of telling a story that is universal. In other words, that it shares something that, you know, your audience, the other person you're talking to also shares that experience. I grew up in a world very, very different from the people that I was around when, you know, when I moved as a kid. And I learned to just shut up, because I would tell a story and it would be so fantastical that they did not know what I was, you know, they just thought I was either making stuff up or what. You just learn you don't want to be different as a kid. And it's interesting that you have that insight. Do you have some thoughts on that, Bridget, about that sort of matching of a fantastical story or a story that will resonate with what the other person has experienced?
I think, I guess, if you've connected and above empathy, I think you can still find a connecting thing, even if you haven't experienced it. There's always that way of, if you kind of put yourself in their shoes, if you kind of let your imagination, it's kind of like sort of suspending judgment, if that makes sense, as a listener. So you kind of have to suspend judgment and just sort of listen in a way that you kind of go, oh, imagine if, and then you kind of put yourself in their shoes. And so that way, when they're telling you, you can still, you know, can connect, even though you have nothing in common. So it is that sometimes, like I said, when I went into the I had nothing in common with a lot of them, but I found that there was always a way to find that common connection. There's always a way that you can find, you know, something, you know, and you just hold on to that one little thing, and then you can build it into something different. It's even like with young people as well. So I guess even if we're older, we're still like young, like children as well. You still have to you can still use transferable. It's still the same, because sometimes we kind of think, I just want to get a story, boom. But no, actually, you still sometimes have to go through that way, because young people, when you're trying to get stories from them, it's a very different approach. But you still have to go with that same approach, even if you're going for adults or older people or anyone else that you think, you still have to use those same techniques in a way.
It's a lot about when you were talking about sort of different way of approaching to
Yeah.
get the stories.
Yeah.
It is sometimes you might have to do something very different, like you said, sort of ask for advice or play a game or something, and that will lead on to further discussions. So I found that the two truths and a lie, it's supposed to be a quite quick thing, but when people start to discuss the three things you say, and they start to discussing, could it be, what could be right, what could be wrong, and when you reveal what's wrong, what's the lie, and they start, did you really do that? So when they found out that I had slept in a snow cave on a mountain in a snowstorm, they thought that was a lie. It wasn't. And it was then they wanted to know more. Why did I do that? And so I think that, yeah, it's more and more, as you say, be flexible,
Yeah.
be prepared to go in any direction, and the listening.
Yeah,
Listening.
definitely. I mean, some of the other prompts I've used is ask people to share 7-word bio. So 7 words or statements to describe you, or 7 words. So just give 7. Or another one I've used is take a moment from your life and choose a song that would be a soundtrack that would describe the moment. So again, so a little bit, or tell your story in 90 seconds. So yeah, so sometimes you just do the little word association. So yeah, being flexible and prepared is the best way to be, because then you collect the little nuggets of joy.
Yeah.
I tend to think that these kinds of little exercises force people out of their comfort zone of always telling the same story, always telling it the same way, because all of a sudden you do I love how you described how you had always done this thing, because that's how you just always did it, till someone said to you, you're not talking about yourself.
Yeah.
And gave you that challenge. I love that, and it's inspiring, especially combined with the thoughts on how to be a listener, and that the listening is the gift.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I'm going to keep coming back to. I went, as you were talking about the 11 items, the story library, the story landscape.
Yeah.
I went back into, at the end of this, you will all have, and if you're watching the recording down below, the project recipe. And in that project recipe, Bridget has a list of 11 items. And I realized in looking back on it, because of formatting things, I had to take the numbers out. But ask advice isn't exactly listed as one of, it's a strategy, it's a technique. It doesn't really fit necessarily in the library bit. But to me, that's such a powerful one. It's such a powerful one in the startup world, where I was often going hat in hand to investors saying, won't you invest in my project? The secret is always go for advice, and then you will get money.
Always, because one thing about people is, if someone comes to you for advice, you always answer. You'd always say, oh, you'll try and be helpful, or try and get someone else to be helpful. But we're wired to want to help. So once you go in for advice, it's always a win-win, and there's less resistance. So so basically you're trying to go for the path of less resistance. That's literally what you're trying to do. You're trying to go through the path of less resistance in trying to capture the stories, because if you go to traditional rate, because I say with a lot of within African community, a lot of it's oral traditions. You don't want to talk about personal stuff. There's a lot of resistance when I tried the traditional route. So I have to go with the road of least resistance, where as soon as I go to somebody, just like the Uber driver earlier on, it was just like, I was talking about storytelling. He's like, yeah, I came. Then I said, he asked where I was from. I said, my parents from Ghana. So that was our way in, because then he's like, I came at this point. And so literally, it was such an easy way. But if I just said something else, and because I said to him, it came from advice, because I said to him, I need to get home before 5 because I've got to do this thing. So literally, he was trying to get me home on time to get here. So he was literally trying to help me. He goes, you got in time? I'm like, yes, thank you. So he was trying to help me get home in time so I could kind of be here for the presentation. So in that, we kind of built a little bond because he's trying to go, there's so much traffic, trying to weave in and out the traffic to get me. So yeah, so it's that kind of thing. So that's how so it wasn't planned storytelling session, but it kind of ended up being one because I'd asked him to help me do something.
Zimbabwe Uber driver, if you're watching, thank you. Why you want to name drop Project Kin everywhere you go?
I was like, yeah, I've got to go do this. So yeah, so it's just literally how, because but I get it from my parents worked in mental health. They were mental health nurses. So I guess a lot of the techniques I've kind of picked up from hearing them talk about how they managed when they were dealing with people with mental health issues or conditions, and how, you know, like some nurse people, but my dad always said, people just want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they just want to be acknowledged. That's it. That's one of the things I always remembered. Like whenever I would go and visit my parents at work, if someone said hello, you said hello back. You don't have to have a conversation. You just a smile, a nod, whatever. But I just always remember everybody wants to be seen, heard, or acknowledged. And once people feel that, they're going to open up. So it's
Right.
their listening is part of that. You know, people want to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and keep that in mind when you are going out to collect the stories.
Yeah. I remember my mom used to say, a smile is a gift.
Yes.
And of course, you don't smile just walking along the streets and smiling. These days, you'd assume someone has something in their ear when they do that. But when you look someone in the eye and smile, it's a gift. It's an invitation to begin a conversation. Obviously, you want to be a little careful where you apply that gift. Our BART station can be our transit stations can be a little awkward that way. But it is precisely because it opens and it is an invitation to begin a conversation. It's such a wonderful, powerful way. And I think of the ways nurses have transformed, you know, teaching someone who has had a terrible injury how to move in a chair. Nurses have such a thoughtful experience about subtleties of engagement, like teachers and social workers, youth workers, that kind of thoughtful experience of how to social engineer, how to bring someone to the next step and why. Being empathetic.
Yeah, it's kind of meeting people where they are. I always try to tell people, you've got to meet them where they are rather than where you think they need to be or where you think they could be. So it's always about, so I remember another time I had to go and speak to some young people that had, they were on probation, and when I was doing the Heritage Champion projects about oral history, and I went in with my presentation, they need to know this. And I went in all hard. I took none of my advice and I went in, and then they all looked at me bored. So I had to turn off the presentation and then go, okay, to talk about buildings. I'm like, what buildings do you like and what buildings don't you like? And literally from that conversation, that we were able to open up the conversation, because they talked about the buildings, like the probation buildings, the prisons that were built really ugly, really horrible, not inviting, but they loved going to these buildings that were very beautiful, whatever. And then from that conversation, we got talking about legacy and like, well, every day you're leaving a legacy. What legacy do you want to leave?
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to then go into more family. So yeah, so it literally, I had to meet them where they were, because so I've learned all of this trial and error. As I said, I have gone into places where I've kind of gone and going, they need to know this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask these questions, and then silence, crickets. Okay, this hasn't worked. Okay, let's try something else. Okay, so it's being willing to not get anything and being okay that your approach didn't work, and okay, that didn't work this time, let me try something else next time. So not taking it personally that you didn't get the story or you didn't engage with a person. It's just your approach didn't work. They might have been having other issues going on, something else. It doesn't matter. Take it as a learning, move on. Next time we'll try again. So that's really taking it, not taking it personally that you didn't get. Don't take rejection. It wasn't a rejection. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
I like to conduct experiments and explore and have fun. So, it's just another experiment.
Or as I like to say, you don't typically learn from success, you learn from failure. And
yes,
if you got lucky and were successful, you're not paying attention. Yeah. Linda, go
Just
ahead.
like to thank you for all the tip. I'm listening and seeing what I could put into this weekend. See how much I can get out of people.
That's right. Linda has if you don't mind my sharing, a
Yeah,
special family gathering this weekend
Oh,
coming
okay.
up. So we chatted a little bit about that in yesterday's program. And yeah, that's a great example, Linda. I'm thinking ahead to a summer reunion of sorts for my brother's anniversary, that we're all getting together as a family. And gee, maybe I should have little, you think you know everybody, but do you? And that's a
Oh,
great way to have
well,
that.
I know I don't know everybody, so it'll be interesting to see. I don't know how much time I'll have in a group, say, but maybe even individually, kind of, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
try.
Yeah, even individually, but yeah, sometimes like when we meet up with our family, we will probably just find a memory that everyone kind of can remember, like majority can, and then we just bring everybody in slowly, and then after that you kind of take someone to the side and go, oh, can you tell me more? So yeah, we generally find that common thing. Or do you remember this day when this happened? Were you there at that point? No, okay. And then it kind of snowballs from there, I guess. But yeah, it's all fun in
Yeah.
learning and finding things out.
In families, we have, typically in-laws. We have new family members that marry into the family, or, people who were little the last time you saw them, and now all of a sudden they're living, speaking, talking adolescents with an opinion. And yeah, you think you already know everything about them, but do you? And bringing them into that. I felt that way about my in-laws, my husband's family, and I've always paid attention to that because they're here in the Bay Area. But my sister reminded me of how many people on her side of the family don't know who all these people really are. I was, well, yeah, she's younger. She wasn't there, and she doesn't know all the in-laws. Don't know they're grown-ups now, but anyway, those kinds of differences, even within a family where you've known their names your whole life, but do you really know them? And that's a great example.
And I guess within families, it's embracing that difference as well. So it's sort of like embracing the difference as well. Like, yeah, let's, but embracing the difference, but but finding the common ground.
Or your wonderful example of not knowing about your aunt's life. Was it an aunt? Her life in Ghana before she came back here. That was an entire life, that a whole different definition of person, to realize that they had all of that experience. Yeah.
And it's finding a lot of other aunts that I've been speaking to, again, a lot, because when I say single story narrative, the narrative is everybody came for a better life, but actually some people had amazing things they were doing before, and it was just maybe a reason why they came. So you kind of see them as this person and go, oh, they came, but then actually, like, you was running a business. Oh my goodness, you was running a school. Oh my goodness, you had this whole life before, and then in fact, you're just doing this. So it's that kind of go, no, not everybody came for different reasons. It wasn't always about a better life. Sometimes it was like I had to come for family, or we had to come and help somebody, and we were meant to get back, but then life happened and we didn't end up going back. We weren't meant to stay, but we ended up staying and had to make it work, so it's sort of understanding that everyone migrates for different reasons, in a sense. Of families do things for different reasons. So it's not always it's new. There's a lot of nuances.
Yeah. And you know what? That's probably a great place to end for today's session, because that's where you and I came together the first time. If you remember, the whole idea of migration stories. As Project Kin, I've made an somewhat intense effort to extend our world beyond the United States. And just recently, I noticed that our membership is now only 50% from the United States and 50% from the rest of the Anglophone world, which includes you, Anna, in Sweden, all the way out to actually Singapore and India, but largely the UK to Australia. And by opening up the world to that breadth of the globe, it's really a reminder for those of us in the United States who are especially parochial, that everybody in the United States is a migrant, and that people from, especially all across the Anglophone world, have been coming and going from different parts of the world in ways that really tie us into history. And so history is so much a part of what we do, as well as the practical nature of who were you before you came here? Where else have you been? What other lives have you lived? And particularly for professionals, where very often the professional certifications and whatnot don't travel with the person. They might have been a doctor in another country and then come to another place and are a nurse or a teacher or something else. We certainly see that a lot here. Sorry?
Cab driver.
Cab drivers, exactly. Never underestimate your cab driver. Or you know what? Never underestimate anybody, right? And so I'm just thrilled. I want to thank you so much for taking the time, the thoughtfulness, the empathy, to be here and share such wonderful insight. I hope all of you take a moment to enjoy the carefully written, thoughtful summary of kind of the workflow she shared in the excuse of our project recipes. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. All of these programs are, of course, available on our projectkin.org as you dive into the forum hosted over on Substack. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll get the recording out within a couple of hours, if not less. And stay tuned for our programs next week. We have Kathy Stone in the Kathy's Corner next Thursday, and new programs scheduled out through June that will be appearing on our calendar shortly. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Nice to see you, Anna. Bye, Barbara.
Bye.